Okay, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here today. First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Vladimir. I'm currently a student in Carleton University. I'm studying business and economics, and over the last few weeks, my job was to take a look at gold and try to understand it as an asset, as a potential investment, as well as its past and potential of the future. And I'm here to share with you some of the very exciting things that I have found throughout my own research of gold. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty details of gold, I want to talk about the monetary system. Now, right away, I've thrown you into the deep water. Monetary system, that sounds, very intimidating. What is a monetary system, first of all? Monetary system is a collection of policies, institutions, and instruments that come together in an economy with a goal of regulating money supply. Every country, in the world has a certain monetary system that it follows. I want to next introduce to you a quote by one of the most renowned entrepreneurs in history, who has been responsible for bringing to you the automobile and a car that potentially some of you have used to get here today. His name is Henry Ford. I want to read to you a quote by Henry Ford about our monetary system. "It is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning." So that's a pretty controversial thing to say. We have defined that our monetary system are a collection of policies, instruments, and different regulations that exist to control the monetary supply. And Henry Ford believes that if the public truly understood how our monetary system functions, there would be a revolution because they would not be satisfied with it. How come? Why does Henry Ford believe that? Simply because he understands that our monetary system exists with built-in inflation. I want to explain to you what inflation does to everybody within the economy. And before I get into it, I want to explain to you more concretely of how our monetary system functions. So this is the US government. The US government likes to spend a lot of money. In fact, just last year it spent about $6.8 trillion, out of which it only collected $3 trillion in taxes. So the question is, where did the United States government get the other $3 trillion? It's simple. It borrowed it. It borrowed it from its central bank. Every country has a central bank. The job of the central bank is to create money and give it to the government for whatever the government needs to spend it on. Now, the key thing, the US central bank is the Federal Reserve, and the key thing about the way the system functions is when the United States needs the money, like it did last year when it borrowed $3 trillion, and it asks that money from the Federal Reserve creates that money out of thin air. It's not backed by anything other than a few touches of the keyboard, and suddenly $3 trillion exists in an economy for the US government to spend. What's important to understand is this is a loan. It needs to be paid back, right? And like any loan, there's an interest that is associated with it. In return for the money, the US government gives the Federal Reserve an IOU, which is called a treasury bond. That is a promise from the United States government to pay back the loan plus interest. Now, the Federal Reserve doesn't buy the IOUs themselves. They do in very rare occasions. Instead, what the Fed does is sell them to investors. They sell them to people, to hedge funds, to central banks of foreign countries, to even people like you and I. We can buy the treasury bonds and have access to a very secure investment in the United States government. How more secure can it get? But the question is, where does the United States government get the money to pay back the initial loan that it borrowed from the Fed? It borrows more money from the Fed to pay back the money that it already has borrowed in an endless loop. That's what happens. And as a result of it, in order to pay back the first dollar that was created and put into existence, it needs to borrow more and more money and put it into the existence. This increases the supply of the money that is in circulation. And the United States government can just create an unlimited amount of dollars because, it's just a printing press. It's just a few keyboards on the computer. To illustrate to you how far they have taken this printing machine so far, today, national debt is a little bit shy of $30 trillion. Just in 2016, it was $19 trillion. And by 2026, it is projected to be $52 trillion. So the United States just needs to keep printing more money in order to pay back the debt. And as a result, they keep getting more and more into debt. So this is where inflation comes in. Inflation is the parent of unemployment and the unseen robber of those who have saved. This is a quote by Margaret Thatcher, and it really illustrates the main points, the downsides of what a monetary system that has built-in inflation brings to the people that are within it. It erodes your purchasing power. What does that mean? It means the savings that you have today won't be able to purchase what they can today tomorrow. And I want to take it a step further and talk about the purchasing power of the dollar throughout time. This is an excellent chart that illustrates what you're able to purchase for $1 starting in 1913. I'll walk you through it so you can understand it. In 1913, for $1, you were able to purchase 30 Hershey's chocolate bars. In 2020 dollars, that same amount would take you $26 to purchase. While in 1929, $1 would be able to buy you 10 rolls of toilet paper. By 2020, that amount has increased to $15. And so forth. We'll move it along all the way to 2020, where the only thing you can really buy for $1 is no longer 10 rolls of toilet paper, 10 bottles of beer, or 20 bottles of Coca-Cola. It's $1 is worth of McDonald's coffee. Small size, of course. And in a few years, you won't be able to purchase that either. So this is a fiat system. It means that when the medium of exchange that we use is created by the government out of thin air with nothing to support it. It's good for the government because it allows them to create an endless amount of this money and spend it on whatever it wants. But it hurts the individual. It hurts you and me because, as we have established, our purchasing power gets destroyed over time. But it doesn't have to be like this. In fact, throughout time, civilizations have used a completely different monetary system that is not fiat-based, but is based on commodity money. I want to explain to you what commodity money means. Commodity money means simply that the medium of exchange requires some sort of inherent investment before being able to be exchanged. It requires maybe extraction from the ground, some sort of farmland to be grown on, some sort of refinement, some sort of an input before one is able to exchange it with another for value. That's what commodity money is. And throughout history, time and time again, the most secure and popular commodity that has been used to support monetary systems has always been gold. I want to take it a step further to illustrate to you the purchasing power that gold has had throughout time. So let's go way back 6 centuries ago to the time when the Babylon kings ruled over Mesopotamia. 1 ounce of gold back then was able to purchase you 350 loaves of bread. And then fast forward to today, that same ounce of gold is still able to purchase you, let's say a loaf of bread is worth $3 US. An ounce of gold as we speak is traded at about 1,830. You're able to purchase 610 loaves of bread today. Now just take a moment and think about that. Where 6 centuries ago, this is a timeline that is really hard to comprehend. You're able to use this commodity to exchange for value, and you're still able to use it today. That is incredible. I wanted to take it to the current time, not the Babylonian times, to see the purchasing power of gold. And I did a little experiment yesterday where I took these are very popular commodities that are traded in the United States. You have wheat, corn, soybeans, sugar. I took the prices from these commodities from 1980 to 2020, and I took the price of gold to see how much an ounce of gold was able to be traded for each one of these commodities. And from 1980 to 2020, you were able to purchase on average with 1 ounce of gold 167 wheat, then 211.79 corn, and so on. You get the point. But the incredible part from this study is today gold has the highest purchasing power than at any other time in history which I have inputted the data from. So today, on average, gold is able to purchase 76% more wheat than it has been able to from 1980 to 2020. That's just to illustrate to you the purchasing power that gold has. And 6 centuries ago, you were able to purchase bread with it. You're still able to do it today, and the purchasing power of it increases throughout time. So the important thing about the gold standard is clearly it helps the individuals that save in it. It helps the people like you and I, and it harms the government because it puts constraint on them. They can't just create as much of this medium of exchange as they want to. The question then arises, how do we come to have a monetary system that is fiat-based, that is not based on commodity money, that helps us? And let's answer that question and go back in time to World War II. During World War II, the United States did very well, not only because it won the war, but because it traded lots of goods with the Allied countries. It traded in equipment, food, weaponry. It accumulated a huge surplus. And as a result, by the end of the war, the United States had 80% of the world's gold reserve. What is important to note is that all the transactions, it's hard to imagine a world that is not fiat-based, but it has been throughout history, majority of the time. But during World War II, every transaction that was occurring between the Allied countries was in gold, because nobody was able to trust any other medium of exchange. So when the United States was a trading partner with other countries, the only transactions that it received were in gold and no other currency. So going back to the end of the war, it accumulated 80% of the world's gold reserve. It had the strongest economy by far, strongest military, so it had leverage over every other country. In 1944, a conference was called in the United States with nations all over the world going there to basically hear the new established monetary system that was to be run by the United States. And the new monetary system would have gold as, it would have the United States dollar as the reserve currency of the world. So what does that mean, reserve currency? It means that all the foreign transactions were to be denominated in the United States dollar. It also means that all the values of foreign countries were to be denominated in the US dollar. It simply means that the United States dollar was very powerful. But the United States dollar had something tangible backing it back then. It had gold. For every $35 that the Federal Reserve was able to issue, it had to have 1 ounce of gold in the bank to support the paper currency. You see, the United States dollar acted as the receipt for gold. You could have 35 bucks, you could go to the bank, you could place it on the counter, and you could get in exchange real money. And this policy was not only domestic, it was international. So the foreign countries that were trading with the United States gave them a promise that we'll trade with you in dollars, but these dollars, they have gold to support them in the vault. And so after 1944, this new monetary system started to exist. Everybody was thriving, but something happened. The United States started spending a lot of money. The United States financed the mission to the moon back then. They financed the Vietnam War. They financed the guns and butter policy, the war on poverty, and many more initiatives. And different foreign nations started to take notice of this expenditure that the United States was undertaking. And remember, the United States dollar was a receipt for gold. I want to talk to you about President of France in the 1960s, Charles de Gaulle. When he noticed that the United States, basically what he did is he finally took notice that, wait a second, maybe all these dollars that the United States is printing, there's more of them than there's gold to support it. So he made an address to the world and to the United States claiming the following, and I would like to read to you the quote, if I can. The fact that many countries accept as a principle dollars being as good as gold for the payment of the differences existing to their advantage in the American balance of trade, this very fact leads Americans to get into debt, and to get into debt for free, at the expense of other countries. Because what the US owes them, it is paid, at least in part, with dollars they are only allowed to emit. We consider necessary that international trade be established, as it was the case before the great misfortunes of the world, on an indisputable monetary base, and one that does not bear the mark of any particular country. Which base? In truth, no one, you see. How one could really have any standard criterion other than gold. What he did, he addressed the United States and he basically said, let's go back to the gold standard. We don't trust your dollars, and we want the gold that's in your vault in exchange for them. So France started sending all of the dollars that were transacted with the United States in exchange for gold. Other countries saw this and soon followed. Before long, the United States gold reserves were depleted to such an extent that they had to take drastic measures to stop this. In 1971, Nixon made an address that basically took the world off the gold standard. And just a quote summarizing his speeches, I have directed Secretary Connolly to suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. So what does that do? As a result of the United States having the reserve currency status, when it went off the gold standard, it simultaneously made every other currency an economy in the world fiat-based. That has never happened before in history, where one country was able to create a world that is based on fiat and not based on actual hard, tangible money. What did this do to gold prices? Right away, an ounce went from 35 bucks to 850. And to illustrate to you also the purchasing power, if you were to have your money, your savings in the currencies, the fiat currencies compared to gold, this is what would happen to them. To summarize the chart, you would lose a lot of your value. But that's the past, right? So we've talked about a lot of history. But what about the future? Today, we have a pretty good bull market for gold. Since 2018, gold is up about 43%, which is just incredible. And just from my analysis, it's very interesting to see that how when gold started accumulating in value exponentially, all the other commodities started following. But what about the future of gold? What is the price of gold in the future? The truth is, I have no idea. I mean, it's really hard to predict the price of something, yet along something so global as gold. But in my pursuit of trying to answer this question, I've just tried to stand on the shoulders of giants and see what they are doing. And one of the men that I've consistently have been going back to with the hopes of understanding where gold could go in the future and where the world itself could go is Ray Dalio. For those of you who do not know who Ray is, he's, to put simply, he's a billionaire. He founded the largest hedge fund in the world called Bridgewater Associates, and through it he's been very successful. What does Ray do? He looks at the world, at the way the current system functions, and then he makes bets on his predictions of where it could go. So what is the bet that Ray is currently taking? Ray is currently heavily betting onto gold. He's accumulating a lot of this stuff. He's diversifying from equities into gold. I want to give you a quote by him. I believe that it would be both risk reducing and return enhancing to consider adding gold to one's portfolio. Now, this is a man, when he speaks, everybody else wants to listen to, because he has been very successful in taking these types of bets. Why is Ray Dalio accumulating gold? That has been a question on my mind for the last few months. And luckily, Ray has been very transparent in his thought process for accumulating this asset. Him, and along with Bridgewater Associates, they have released a 600-page study called The Changing World Order, in which they basically detail how they have come to believe that gold could be a good investment in the future, in the near future. And I'll try to summarize a 600-page report in 2 minutes. Basically, the two main factors that increase the value of gold are inflation and political uncertainty. Why? Because they reduce the value of the medium of exchange that the country is using. People want to save their money in a safe haven, so they rush towards gold, as they have throughout history. That's why when inflation occurs with political instability, or one or the other happens, gold appreciates in price. And that's why also we have had such a beginning of such a huge bull market run for gold lately. It's because of record high inflations currently. But anyway, I want to talk about the report. This is it, The Changing World Order, Why Nations Succeed and Fail. And I'll try to really quickly give you a summary. It's really fascinating stuff. What Ray did is go back in time through history to understand what is happening today. He took the last 3 main empires that have existed, the Dutch, the British, and the USA. At the time that he was studying, they were the global superpower. The Dutch, during the 16th century, it was the United States of today. And same later on for the British Empire. And in every single case, as we know how the world is today, eventually their civilizations have declined, and currently they are not considered a superpower. But the United States is, so that's what's fascinating. There's 3 parts to the study that he basically broke it down to. One is he identified variables that lead to that particular civilization developing and accumulating power, as well as its decline. So those factors being education, military strength, financial center, strength, innovation and technology, and so on. So whenever a country experiences, for example, higher education output, more educated population eventually leads to higher output in innovation and technology, which eventually leads to being a more competitive country, having a stronger financial center, then leads to military growth, then trade, and then reserve status. Every single civilization, superpower, has followed that particular exact same trend. From the Netherlands, which were the Dutch, then it was the British, and now it's the United States. And what's fascinating is, this is the Dutch, by the way, so you can clearly see that they have experienced a growth in all these factors, and then eventually they've reached their peak, and now then they declined. So that's the Dutch, and when you take a look at the United States today, what Ray Dalio basically, along with Bridgewater Associates, observed is that a very similar chart that happened to the Dutch and the British, the United States is currently experiencing as well. A decline in the factors that lead to the rise and fall of civilization. That was one of the factors that the study has taken into account. Next, so other than the loss of these factors later on, which leads to the civilization's decline, next is the country itself starts spending a lot more money than it's making. It starts printing a lot of money, and that's essentially what the Dutch were doing. This is the charts of the Bank of Amsterdam, which was the financial center in the Netherlands. Dutch and East India Company, which was basically the Dutch at the time. You can see their profit and loss statement. What does this do is also corrode the value of the reserve currency. Not the reserve currency, but the medium of exchange that the countries are using. So it makes people lose, purchasing value, savings corrode. This is Dutch, and this is the United States today. So you can see external debt levels at a record high, this other stuff. I'm not going to bore you with numbers. You get the point. If you want to get a little bit more technical, you can come talk to me afterwards, or you can read the report. But this is just another interesting thing, how USA is just importing way more than it's exporting, and all these other very scary things are happening. But so you have these factors, then you have the inflation, and then the final one is a competing superpower. So the Spanish were overtaken by the Dutch. Then the Dutch were overtaken by the British were overtaken by the States. What is to overtake the United States? There's always a competitor in the picture when it comes to the rise and fall of superpowers. And it's China. So you can see the Bridgewater Associates report plotted all these different variables, and to see the rise and fall of civilizations throughout time. And if you can take a look at it, United States and China are on course for collision. In every single scenario, also a war resulted, a military war, where one superpower was basically to challenge the other, and the conflicts escalated to a point where military force had to be involved. What's interesting is that before a military war happened, 10 to 15 years, an economic war happened. And that is what's happening with China right now. Trade war is happening, certain sanctions, anything that the superpower, current one, can do in order to stagnate the other's growth. These are just some other charts that illustrate to it. I just showed you the highlights. You can take a look at them in more detail. And to summarize the report, it's basically when you have these factors that lead to the decline of civilization, not civilization, but the status of the superpower, as well as higher inflation, loss of the value in reserve currency, and a competing superpower, what does that lead to? It leads to political uncertainty. You don't know what will happen tomorrow, and when people don't know what will happen tomorrow, they buy gold. That's kind of the summary of the report. Because gold has been able to store value throughout time. During these times of political uncertainty, your money will be worth the same tomorrow as it is today if you have it in gold. And just to leave you off with a note, I urge you to do what the French president did in the 1960s, is to move your wealth from the paper money into the real money, to buy gold. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Yeah.